All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's start with this. These are the notes for the Great Awakening and Enlightenment. But I just want to emphasize that you are to take notes in class. You have to take notes in class. The privilege that you all get is that you don't have to turn your notes in. You all know that you can use your notes for chapter tests, and you can use your notes for chapter quizzes. You cannot use them for any benchmark exams. You just have to have something to study. Because when you all are not taking your notes in class, okay, your brains are turned off, your productivity declines, and you all just kind of sit there and don't do anything. So I want to make sure that I clarify that at the beginning of this video. All right. And any notes that you do take, you get to turn in for extra credit on top of that. All right. So these notes are important. All right. So let's begin. Okay. Chapter 4. This is the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening. All right. The Enlightenment and Great Awakening. And as you prepare for your benchmark, how did the developing American identity unite with the colonists? Well, one way the colonists began to unite is the way that they began to think. Their thinking changed and it became more American, more geared toward equality, more geared toward natural rights, okay, and challenging authority. So let's get into this. Now, learn how the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment affected colonial society. Okay, specifically, how colonists' thinking began to change, not only just the colonists, because as we saw in one video, this affected everyone, including slaves, including women, everyone. So, the must do assignment here is to turn these notes into a double bubble comparison thinking map where you are comparing um, the motives. Okay, we said the motivations, okay, the desires, some of you all said in class, of the Protestant preachers, and then the beliefs and motivations of Enlightenment thinkers. That's what we're comparing here in our thinking map. Now, in class today, we looked at um, this thinking map, okay? And I think I sent it to you with the T chart in it, but you typed in Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield revivals, John Locke, Benjamin Franklin founders, and the Enlightenment. So if you need to pause and get that, do that now. Let's start with Jonathan Edwards, okay? Now, I believe we said for Jonathan Edwards that um, he came to warn the colonists. Okay, now he was a colonist living in Massachusetts, right? But he wanted to warn the colonists because, as we saw in the first two paragraphs, the colonists were, they had their religious freedom. They could be religious or not be religious, and they kind of did their own thing. Preachers noticed this and tried to bring them back to God. So Jonathan Edwards, as we know, was one of those preachers, famous preachers, that is responsible for the first great awakening in the colonies. He came to warn the colonists that God was angry and that if they did not return, he was going to drop them into the fires of hell. I think he referred to them as spiders, and he's going to let go of the string and you're going to drop into hell. Okay. Colonists began to, and it, well, he didn't say it in a nice way. Okay. He had to say it in an authoritarian type of, direct way, wagging his finger, come back to God. That's one of the reasons why we even founded these 13 colonies, so we could be closer to God and have relationship, right? Next was George Whitefield. And George Whitefield came from Britain. Okay, he heard about this awakening happening in the colonies. And so he came from Britain, which is kind of interesting because they didn't have religious freedom in Europe at that time, and that's why so many Europeans left. The early Americans left there to come and practice. So it's interesting that he came after the colonies had been established. But we said in our notes that George Whitfield, okay, so now you're on George Whitfield, was an aggressive preacher. Okay, he used thundering words. He jumped up and down, waved his arms, got in people's faces, and was very aggressive with bringing them and pulling them, kicking and dragging to salvation. Okay. Some were even brought to tears. Some even passed out or fainted, as you can see. So we added those things for George Whitfield. I emphasize that revivals, okay, when these early Americans came and sat in these revivals, I wanted to emphasize and stress, because I think you'll see it on a benchmark, that it changed how people began to think and how they viewed religion, morality, and how they viewed authority. Okay. How they viewed authority. They were preaching that you didn't need to go to a church official, a politician, a leader in the community to have a direct relationship with God. You could go directly to God. And once they, started to question the authority of some of these officials, they started to challenge it. And you saw this challenge of authority in the colonies because of the Great Awakening. And it is this challenging and questioning that leads us to the American Revolution. Because if we can have direct relationship with God, then why we need a middleman, right? They started to see themselves as equal after attending some of these revivals. Okay, so that's important. Let's jump over to the Enlightenment. For John Locke, I think all we put was natural rights. Okay, and I'll pause here and let you type this in. Now, John Locke was responsible for this idea that we were born free. Okay, it was new in the 17th century. A lot of people didn't think that they were born free. But he came up with this notion that we were born free and we have the freedom to life and the freedom to liberty. Everybody's born equal. And that was an interesting concept because, there was a king and a queen, and they were thought to be the extension of God's hand and God's authority. Okay. This is important because one of our founders, Benjamin Franklin, was influenced by this idea of natural rights. He even dedicated his time to public service and trying to spread the word. But this idea influenced our American founders to found this country based on freedom and natural rights. And as I, asked the question in class, what do you think the slaves thought when they heard this? We saw in the video that this great awakening wasn't just among, the white religious people there. Okay. It spread throughout the colonies. Okay. Probably even some Native Americans, I'm sure. All right. So the Enlightenment, that was Benjamin Franklin and the founders, and the Enlightenment just really taught, if you look at this highlighted part, it taught the colonists how to think. Don't just trust everything the politicians and leaders and religious leaders tell you. Use logic and reason and make the decision yourself. Make the choice yourself. And that's what the Enlightenment did for people. It opened up their minds that they could reach their own conclusions and pursue their own happiness, and not to just trust religious figures or political figures, everything that they told them. All right. So I don't want this to go too long. You have that information. You should now um, restate, okay, this question, answer this question over here. How did the Great Awakening and Enlightenment affect colonial society? Pause and think about that. So, some of the things that you can write here is that we read that the colonists began to be free thinkers. They used reason and logic to draw conclusions. They didn't just believe everything their leaders told them. They began to come closer to God. Okay. They got rid of the middleman, that religious leader that said that everybody's got to come through me first, and then I will, you know, plead on your behalf. No, you can have a direct relationship. And so they started, with God. And so they started to, really challenge and think deeply about authority, all authority. And that's something that is uniquely American. All right. So you're only turning in the thinking map for this. Okay. That's the must do. I will expect you to have these notes. Okay, so have them ready so we can prepare for our benchmark and any chapter tests or quizzes that may come up. And then all of this, okay, you can download as a PDF and turn in for extra credit. And if you turn it in as a flip book, okay, you can use the site flipsnack.com, I think it is, and you can take your PDF, load it up into Flipsnack, and it'll turn it into a nice flip book. Okay. Send me a message in Schoology if you have questions.